Okay, this is going to be really different from what I normally do. I don't do in-depth videos, but Raya and the Last Dragon is so rich with unexplored storylines, and every time I think about it, I just go down a rabbit hole. I tried addressing some of these subjects in my rewrite, but I would just continuously keep getting off topic of my rewrite. So I had to scrap a lot of it, but I still wanted to talk about it, and that's when the idea of doing this video hit me. Truth is, there's other movies and shows that I want to dive into, and depending on how well this video does will depend on how often I do these deep dives. Just to make sure there's no confusion, this video is about the film and not my rewrite. I might sometimes refer to my rewrite just because I know that I previously talked about the subject. This is all very new to me and I don't even know if I'm doing it right, but I still want to try, so with that, let's dive into it. In the beginning, we're told about the history of Kumandra and how everyone lived in harmony alongside dragons. This is just a little nitpick, but the way Raya words it makes it sound like the people got along with the dragons, but maybe not as well with each other, and that would make sense considering what little we know about the Droon and how it's implied that people's negative emotions towards each other is how the Droon may have been summoned. Not to mention that after they were brought back, they were immediately at each other's throats. This suggests that the history Raya knows and is telling the audience isn't accurate. After the Droon are banished, this is what caught my attention, this depiction of the clans turning hostile towards each other. In the upper left corner is a group holding swords very similar to the sword Benja uses. Below them is a group holding weapons similar to Namari's swords. I'm aware that each clan have their own versions of these weapons, but none of them that I have seen are as curved as Benja's sword. There are these guards from Talon that looks to be holding either short swords or long daggers that are similarly curved, but they just don't have the length. I'm not a weapons expert, but this does suggest to me that this could be Heart's ancestors in the upper left-hand corner. After this, Raya explains that the desire to possess the dragon gem is what caused Kumandra to be divided into 5 separate nations and that the dragon gem had to be hidden away. The thing is, if something so important as the dragon gem needed to be hidden away, I would think that it would have been taken to a different location than where I believe it was originally discovered. In the film, it's revealed that where the gem was being kept was the same place where the dragons had their last stand, and essentially where the gem was ultimately found afterwards. Again, this is just little nitpicks from me that I'm noticing through multiple rewatches. When Raya passes her test, Benja says something to Raya that's very peculiar. He says, and I quote, "For generations, our family has sworn to protect the gem." He then goes on to tell her that the other clans will be arriving soon. First off, wouldn't it make more sense for Raya to have her test at least a day before this monumentous gathering is supposed to take place? Not only that, but I would think that Benja would have let his daughter know ahead of time instead of just springing on her the last minute, so that she could process this. Raya sees the other tribes as her enemy because I assume that's what she was taught growing up, presumably by Benja, who does seem to be the biggest influence in her life. Essentially, he's expecting her to unlearn everything that she's been taught up to that point about the other clans. Side note, I think it would have been interesting if when Raya was describing the other tribes, the visuals used would be exaggerated, making it clear that this is the point of view of a child and should be taken too seriously. That way, when Raya does see the other tribes, it's a moment of clarity as she sees that they're just like her. Now we get to the good stuff. Benja explains that the only reason that they are enemies in the first place is because the other lands assume that the dragon gem is the cause of Heart's flourishing nation. A couple things wrong with that. Raya literally just said in the opening that what caused the hostility in the first place was the desire to possess the gem. Not to mention that the only way Heart would have been able to take possession of the gem would be through forceful means, I assume. After 500 years of them continuously keeping possession of the gem and the fact that their nation is continuously prospering while the others are implied to be struggling to a degree, I'd be bitter towards Heart too. Both Benja and Raya are verbal in stating that that's not true, but I'm inclined to think differently, and here's why. 6 years later, after the Droon's return, the leader of Tail has passed away, cause of death unknown. Her body is placed within a tree with a piece of the gem resting in her hands. What makes it significant is that the tree seems to be growing around her body, but how can that be? There does not seem to be a water source within any of the shots, and the environment within Tail is described to be made up of deserts. It's possible that there's an underground spring in the canyon, but given how elevated the tree is and that the ground has been carved away where the roots are, makes it less plausible that a spring is keeping the tree alive. But I'm not a geologist. In the chase sequence, we get a good view of the environment and there is absolutely nothing else growing in sight, not even near the water or in it from what I saw. So what makes this tree different? The only thing I can think of is the gem. With all of this in mind, I have developed a theory. It's all speculation with no real evidence to back it up, but here it is. I think the gem does give off some type of energy that does influence its environment. I'm also inclined to believe that the previous leaders of Heart discovered this and chose to keep this within the royal family, because if it is confirmed that yes, the gem does influence its environment, this could cause the other nations to unite in order to take the gem from Heart, leaving Heart destitute. That would explain Binge's previous statement and why the position of guard is kept within the royal family, to keep others from discovering this and leaking the information. Obviously, this information would be passed down to each generation within the royal family, all the way to Binge. However, it's clear that Binge is trying to break that cycle. For one, he's inviting not one or two, but all 4 tribes within his home at the same time and in the close proximity of the gem. He's also trying to expand Raya's negative views of the world around her, but what brought this on? I would think that a gathering of this magnitude set in this time period would take a significant amount of time, maybe even years. Given what we know, it's made clear that none of the other nations get along with each other, so obviously it would be an uphill battle to get them to cooperate, and this would without a doubt take a lot of back and forth communicating to confirm that everyone is on the same page. Even though the film doesn't address the work that went into this history-making moment, but undoubtedly, this would be years in the making. But this still doesn't explain what is causing Binge to go against his family's wishes, if I'm remotely correct on this. Before the meeting, he's talking to Raya, and it's implied that they could be on the brink of war, and he makes it very clear that he does not want Raya to grow up in that. This could be a stretch, but just maybe there was some type of conflict when Binge was younger that exposed him to the horrors of the battlefield. This could explain Tails Chief's comment when she sarcastically asks if they're going to rob them. Was this supposed conflict specifically between Heart and Tail, and perhaps the other nations were affected by it, and that's why Binge is so fearful of Heart's future? If there's a chance that war could break out, what he experienced would be amplified significantly, and it would be Raya that would be the most affected by this. If this was the case, it would all make sense why Binge is taking this risk of inviting his hostile neighbors into his home. This has me thinking of Silco from Arcane and what he said.
Oh, it all makes sense now, brother. Is there anything so undoing as a daughter?
Silco has been fighting for independence for the Undercity, and he does some very terrible things to make it happen, including killing his own brother. But finally, after years, independence is within his reach. However, there's a price, and that price is Jinx, his adopted daughter. They want her to take the fall for everything that's been happening, but he can't bring himself to do it. And that's when he realizes what his brother was trying to tell him so many years ago. Everything changes when you have children. And it's the same way with Binge. He even says in the film that what he's doing is for Raya, and if there's any weight to my theory, I also don't think that he wants to pass on their family's shameful secret. Regardless, whether this is intended or not within the film's story, this would have made a very interesting storyline. Raya discovering this dark secret about her family as she tries to restore the world and has a bit of an identity crisis as a result, and has to make up her mind on how she wants to continue after this revelation and what the fallout will be when she's reunited with her father. There's just so much potential with the story, but we're nowhere near done, so let's continue. 6 years into the future, we find that Raya is trying to find Sisu by traveling to the end of the river and performing a ritual in hopes of summoning Sisu. I don't know anything about this practice, so I cannot and will not comment on it. However, we do learn that Raya stole the Dragon Scroll from Fang that Namari showed her when they were kids, but Raya uses a map showing the outline of the entire river. Not only that, but we see where she's crossed out at least 35 places that she's been. Raya says that she's been searching for 6 years, but why then would she need to steal the scroll a few months prior to reaching the shipwreck? I suppose she may have been getting discouraged and thought that the scroll might have yielded some clue to point her in the right direction, or there could be more to the scroll than what is being led on. After all, it's often said that there is some truth to legends, and I think so too. When Namari first shows Raya the scroll, it's implied that Namari may have taken it without permission. It could also have been a ploy from Verona so Namari could get close to Raya, but that seems a bit unlikely given this is her first time meeting Raya and they obviously wouldn't know what she's interested in. Here's a theory. 500 years ago, Sisu fell into the river and was carried away by the current, and it could be that someone did witness and maybe even try to assist her. This individual or group of people made the scroll recording the event. It could have also been members of Fang that this happened to, and that's why the scroll was in their possession. Also, how else would they know Sisu's name if there wasn't some type of encounter? Not to mention, if it was just one person, I doubt her name would have spread the way it did. The leader of Fang at the time, for whatever reason, chose to keep this to themselves. Namari even says that it's Fang legend, meaning Fang culture. If Fang's royal family continue to keep this bit of history to themselves, what usually tends to happen is that a bit of truth fades with every generation until it becomes nothing more than a bedtime story. This is all hearsay, but it's fun to theorize. When Raya arrives to retrieve the first shard, how did she know where to find it, and why doesn't the new leader of Tail have it in their possession? It's proven that the shards keep the Drune away, so why isn't it in someone's possession? It could be that Tails Chief's closest associates did all this in secret and chose not to disrespect her final wishes and leave the shard with her. But that doesn't really go with the theme of this film, and that still doesn't explain how Raya knew where to find the shard. This has me wondering if there even is a leadership within Tail anymore. Raya doesn't stay in Tail all that long, and she doesn't interact with any of the civilians on screen, which would have been helpful to get an understanding of how the region is operating. Out of all the regions, Tail is the most unexplained and unexplored, which is a shame. Talon gives me mixed signals. It's implied in the beginning that Talon could be struggling along with the other nations, and yet when Raya arrives in Talon, it's very busy and seems to be doing well for itself. Either Deng Hai was an incompetent leader, and that actually could very well be the case, given that someone significantly older than him was able to dethrone him, and it didn't seem like anyone really opposed it either. Also, Chaya the Flower Guy said something very curious. He states that Deng Hua is the most vicious chief Talon has ever seen. This has me wondering if perhaps what really is undermining Talon's growth and prosperity is their leaders. Despite Deng Hua's immoral actions in keeping her people in line, Talon does seem to be doing well under her leadership, but again, we don't really know how long she's been in charge. I'm also not sure if the civilians are aware of the change in leadership. When Deng Hua is first introduced, she immediately diffuses the situation with Sisu, but no one bows to her. It could be that they're comfortable around her, but I really don't think that's the case at all. But at the same time, they don't demand that the old woman pay for Sisu's debt either. Not to mention, she has already had a significant amount of people turn to stone. I counted 7 on screen, but there could be more covered in the foliage. I would think that that would raise suspicion and cause people to ask questions, but given the state of their world, it's probably not uncommon for people to go missing. This just occurred to me, but Baby Noi's mother could be one of Deng Hua's victims. In my fixing video, I did explain why Noi's character felt inappropriate, and it was her character design. She just looked too much like a literal infant instead of the toddler that she was. Not much can be said about Spine. We don't get any opportunities to learn about them, but the same can be said about the other tribes. Unfortunately, what little exposure we get of them isn't all that positive. The people of Spine are described as a warrior tribe that are depicted as larger than the average person, and usually what that means is that they're academically challenged. God, I hate this trope. The fact that they've all unfortunately been turned to stone and the only survivor is portrayed as simplistic reinforces the trope. In the film, the leader of Spine was adamant in his belief that the Dragon Gem is a weapon. First off, how is he coming to that conclusion if Heart has kept the gem hidden away all these centuries? Unless perhaps when Heart supposedly had its conflict with Tail, members of Spine could have witnessed them using the gem. However, Spine is the only ones convinced that the gem is a weapon, which could mean that none of Tail's warriors survived the encounter if the gem had been used as a weapon. If this is the case, then it's understandable why Benja wants to avoid war at all costs. If this got out, without a doubt the other tribes would unite and bring the downfall of Heart or die trying. When the Drune returned and all hell broke loose and everyone flees from Heart, I would think that the group from Spine that was in Heart would have inevitably found out about the Drune's weakness towards water on their way back home. So what did they do with that information? It appeared instead of attempting to get their people to safety, meaning the water, they presumably chose to stand their ground even though they knew what that would mean. This is also confirmed by Tong as well. There's a chance that this was done due to runtime, but still, come on. However, this does leave me wondering, why did only Tong survive? Could it be that not everyone agreed with their leader's decision, or perhaps when everyone starts turning to stone, the chain of command breaks and everyone starts scattering for safety? When that happens, Tong takes the shard from whoever had it, if anyone had it at that point. I'm envisioning a chaotic war zone when this occurred. Obviously, I would think that Tong hopes to use the shard to protect his wife and child from the Drune, but didn't reach them in time. Whatever the case, Tong doesn't seem all that comfortable talking about it, which could mean that he might have PTSD, and it would have been very interesting to watch him overcome it. When first introduced to Fang, they come off more sophisticated and proper than the other tribes because they hold their tongue in the presence of their host. Even Namari at such a young age asks permission before approaching Raya. When the two are talking to each other, Namari hints to Raya that not all is well in Fang. It's implied that there may be a food shortage in Fang, as Namari states that it's been a while since she last had rice. When we see the two of them side by side, Namari does slightly look smaller than Raya, and this could be because she's not getting the proper nutrition that she needs. Namari continues to say that while Fang looks well on the outside, it has its holes, indicating that there's more than one problem plaguing Fang. History has shown us repeatedly that when food becomes scarce, people become aggressive and hostile towards each other that leads to physical altercations, breaking the law, and even rebelling against their government. That could be what's happening in Fang due to the food shortage, and this would cause Verona to be more strict with her people to keep the peace. If this is the case and Amari had to grow up in this, it would undoubtedly traumatize her to a degree. This could also explain why the other tribes come off as aggressive themselves. If they're experiencing a similar situation and have to forcefully keep the peace within their lands, it would obviously take a toll on them as well. Again, Namari could just be dramatizing this to get Raya's sympathy and to get her to lower her guard even more, but when Namari double-crosses Raya, she says she has to do right by her people, implying that there is some truth to what she's saying, which would make doing this treachery an easy choice for her. However, it's clear that what happened after this did affect her just like it affected Raya. When we're introduced to grown-up Namari, she's aggressive, assertive, persistent, and calculating. Fang has done well for itself, which proves that the Dragon Gem, even just a piece of it, does assist in improving the condition of the environment because the creation of the canal alone wouldn't have fixed the problems plaguing Fang. Unfortunately, the fixing of those problems have sprouted new ones. They're prospering too much, as it's stated in the film that they're running out of land, and this could explain Namari's disposition. Things may be okay for now, but she knows what Fang could regress back into, and obviously the fear of that is weighing on her, because if this issue is not resolved by the time the mantle is passed down to her, the responsibility of doing what is necessary will be placed on her shoulders. This fear is obviously amplified near the end of the film when she's confronted by both Raya and Sisu. When she's asked for help, it's clear how torn in half she is by this request. Not only is the person that she wronged asking for her help, but also Sisu, who she admires and looks up to. However, doing what they're asking with no confirmation that it would work would leave her people vulnerable to the June and bring about the inevitable food shortage that she experienced as a child. It's unfortunate that Raya didn't attempt to see things from Namari's perspective, especially since it did seem that she was trying to in the beginning of the film. I had such issues with Sisu's character. I guess I should start off with her design first. The first time Sisu was introduced, her design was more detailed than a final product, but visually I didn't like it. It just wasn't appealing to me. When I saw her final form in the film, I was very distracted by how big her eyes were. Big anime eyes normally isn't an issue for animated characters, but for whatever reason, it just didn't work. It just didn't look right, and it often made her head appear much larger than her body. Her overall design was very basic, and it seemed like other people didn't like it either, given that a trend started in redesigning Sisu. Now let's talk about her actual character. Sisu is very playful, whimsical, and wholehearted, which has her coming off childlike. This may explain why when Raya tells her of the earth-shattering event that left her orphan and essentially homeless, Sisu's response to this is to just think positively. Sisu doesn't seem to grasp how traumatic that event would have been for Raya as a child. She keeps insisting that presenting gifts to the chiefs will show good faith on their part and will more or less be enough to get them to cooperate. What Sisu doesn't seem to understand or even attempt to is that she's asking Raya to bring gifts to the very same chiefs that turned her world upside down. There's this short line that Sisu says that I want to quote. "Being people is hard. You have small heads, no tails, you like to get what you want, like the Talon Chief." This comes off as if Sisu's looking down on humans, maybe even slightly insulting them. If this is the case, this could be why Sisu doesn't seem to be making an effort in seeing things from Rai's perspective and why she thinks her way is better, which it isn't, and let me explain. Every time Sisu comes in contact with one of the fragmented pieces of the Dragon Gem, she inherits one of her siblings' powers. This raises so many questions. First off, is there some kind of hierarchy amongst the dragons? If so, could Sisu be part of the higher ranked dragons because all the powers seem to be coming from her relatives? She doesn't talk about any of the other dragons or their powers, so this leaves me assuming that it's only within her bloodline, which leads me to speculate that Sisu could possibly be from a royal bloodline herself. That's another thing. How did Sisu's family manage to survive the longest out of all the other dragons? Did the other dragons willingly sacrifice themselves to make sure that they lived because of their royal lineage? Or possibly because of their powers? Did their powers give them an advantage to outlast the other dragons? And this is where our problem lies. Sisu takes Raya back to heart and reveals what happened 500 years ago. And what she says next confirms that she really isn't considering Raya's experience at all. I quote, "I don't know why they chose me. It could have been any of us. All I know is that I trusted them and they trusted me." Of course they trusted her. She was their sister, and obviously Sisu trusted her older brother. The trust that Sisu has been preaching throughout this entire film is based on the trust that she had with her siblings that she grew up with. Blood-related trust. She keeps urging Raya to trust strangers, specifically the same people that she had a very negative first encounter with. However, to Sisu's credit, she does practice what she preaches and does blindly trust strangers that unfortunately gets her into trouble. This hints that she could have very well lived a sheltered life, similar to Raya in the beginning of the film. Raya's your typical main character. She's energetic, crafty, and a bit of a smart mouth, which is never a bad thing in my opinion. For the first 15 minutes of the film, she's an okay character until she makes the worst decision of her life, that she never takes responsibility for. Like Sisu, she chooses to blindly trust a complete stranger that she met that day and show them the sacred dragon gem that she swore to protect that same day. Now that I'm thinking about it, Raya's good gesture of showing Namari the dragon gem to make her feel better comes off more as flaunting, showing her something that she'll never have. Not to mention that her father previously told her that day that the other tribes strongly believe that the gem is directly responsible for their prosperity. She also witnessed them arguing about it not that long ago. But in Raya's defense, Fang did not argue with them. It's easy to blame Raya for what happened next, but really I blame her father. He didn't properly prepare her, and it didn't seem that he took any measures to keep the members of the other tribes from wandering around too much. One minor thing. Why is Raya and Namari the only ones that's eating? I've looked several times at these screenshots and no other individual is eating in any of them. They could have eaten off screen because there are people standing behind Binja at the bridge that are holding what looks to be trays, but it is strange that they've finished and Raya and Namari are still eating. Anyway, throughout the film, Raya uses this incident with Namari to condone her belief that no good can come from trusting people. Her point of view is understandable, but it would be nice if she gave other examples besides that one. For example, what was life like for Raya growing up after the Drune's return? Up to that moment, it's clear that she's lived a sheltered life, and I'm curious to know what kind of hardships she encountered growing up without a parent to guide her and a kingdom to protect her. Also, were there any other survivors from Heart besides Raya, and if there were, did they assist in raising her to adulthood, or did they pressure her to lead them and it was too much for her? These are all questions that Raya could have given small answers to Sisu, revealing why it's so hard for her to trust. When it came to the conclusion of the conflict in the film, it never sat right with me, and now I think I understand why. In my rewrite, I noticed that I was kind of picking on Raya a little, and when writing the script for this video, I noticed that I was doing it again, and that's when it hit me. The main issue that I had with this film was accountability. None of the characters take responsibility for the part they played in damaging their world. Instead, they all use Fang as a scapegoat to avoid accountability. They all point the finger, blaming Fang, and while they did start the events that led to their dire situation, each other member of the other tribe literally had a hand in breaking the gem. Not to mention, Raya was the one who ultimately kick-started the events. It's understandable that the children wouldn't know any better, they're just repeating what their parents have probably said. But why does Tong, the only real grown-up in the group, agree with what is clearly not the full truth? The fact that each leader came home with a piece of the gem would suggest to the adults that Fang may not be entirely at fault. However, if their lives had improved due to this, then it's understandable why everyone would turn the other cheek. Also, it can be easier to blame people outside their community for the loss of their loved ones, instead of questioning those within their community. To Fang's credibility, they do own up to their part in the events, and truthfully, they're the only ones. They admit that they didn't mean for things to spiral the way they did, but they're clearly not sorry for it, because Verona addresses that having the dragon gem has improved their lives, which only continues to validate that Heart was indeed hoarding the dragon gem. However, the biggest offender of redirecting blame is Raya. She blames everyone else, specifically Namari. Even when she retells the events, never does she take a moment to consider that if she hadn't shown Namari the dragon gem, would this still have happened? It's hard to admit when you're wrong, especially when you're a child, because it's a parent's job to teach the child what they're doing wrong and why it's wrong, but Raya was old enough that she should have known better. I think what really could have helped deliver the message in the film is if Raya lashed out at Tong, revealing what happened, and Tong apologizes in the place of his chief. And while not excusing his chief's actions, he explains that they didn't do it out of hate or greed, but for their people, their families. And that would have encouraged change of perspective for Raya, which would have changed the story. Ultimately, part of the issue with the conclusion was that Sisu's version of trust was under different circumstances than Raya's situation. But the real reason why the conclusion didn't feel authentic was because neither Raya nor Namari admit specifically to each other that they were in the wrong for the part they played that brought about their current situation when they were kids. I'm aware that Namari did take responsibility for what she did to Sisu, but at the same time, she redirected that blame to Raya. While Raya is aware that she shares the blame, she doesn't verbally communicate that to Namari, which begs the question, can you trust someone that won't admit when they're wrong? The world and scenery of Kumandra is so beautiful and breathtaking that it feels like another character. And it's a damn shame that it wasn't even slightly explored or utilized. There's no doubt that this world was created with love and care, but none of that means anything if it's not presented well and used efficiently. Never in the film do any of the characters interact with the environment or even address it. They don't use the foliage to help identify what part of Kumandra they're in. They don't pick any of the food that would be growing wild, or use any of the plants when one of them gets hurt. The thing is, one's environment plays a part in cultural identity, and for a film that claims to be representing a specific community, their culture doesn't seem to play a part in the story, but is just used as background noise, which is an extreme disservice to those whose culture was used. It's safe to say that Disney bit off more than they could chew with Raya and the Last Dragon. Southeast Asia is made up of various different cultures, and Disney very ignorantly tried to cram all that in a single film under 2 hours. Let's look at another one of Disney's films that was created to represent a specific community, Coco. Set in Mexico, the story focuses on young Miguel who aspires to be a musician despite his family's protest. Instead of trying to cram the entire Latino culture in the film, the creators chose the holiday Dias de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, to help guide Miguel's story. Granted, it's the most infamous holiday within the Latin community and always seems to be the safe choice when telling stories within the Latin culture, only because it's relatively well known outside the community, even if it's only in namesake. However, you take your cultural wins when you can get them. We are introduced to this piece of Miguel's culture in the first act, and throughout the film, the significance of the holiday is expanded upon, and by the end of the film, Miguel learns the importance of that part of his culture. I'm aware that the circumstances between the two films are significantly different, but I still think it's worth pointing out. Many have stated and argued that Raya's story would have greatly benefited had it been made into a series to begin with, and I'm inclined to agree. Even if it was only a mini-series, that extra time would have greatly benefited the story, the characters, and the world building. I know that the demands and expectations in Disney are insane, but I still do hold the creators accountable. I don't know how the creation of this world came to be, but at some point, there's no doubt that the creators became aware that the world they created expanded beyond the film's runtime. And instead of taking a step back and weighing their options, they instead just continued to compress and condense it all into a 2-hour film, which is truly a waste of such a beautiful film. I get how some people might perceive this video as me criticizing and bashing the film, but honestly, spending so much time on this film and exploring the narrative like I have has caused me to establish a newfound love for it. This isn't Disney's best film, and it's nowhere near my favorite Disney film, but I think it's one of their most creatively ambitious films that they've done in a while. I hope Disney learns from this, but you never know with them. Whatever fate befalls this film, always give it a watch before criticizing. Thanks for watching, and like and subscribe.